My name is Wendell. I'm 53 years old, and for 28 years I drove county roads in central Georgia, adjusting insurance claims. I know what it looks like when something has been staged. I know the difference between damage that happened and damage that was arranged to look like it happened. That skill did not help me with my own father until it was almost too late. I called him 19 times between March and October. He answered 3 times. The third call lasted 6 minutes, and near the end, just before he hung up, he said something that made no sense at all. "Wendell," he said, "that old push mower's still sitting in the back of the Hendersons' lot." I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He said, "Yeah, okay," and we hung up. I wrote it on a yellow sticky note and put it in my glove box. At the time, I thought it was just his age. He'd turned 80 in May, and sometimes sentences wandered. I was wrong about what it was, and I was wrong to let myself believe that explanation. The day I drove 2 hours to his house and got turned away, it was a Thursday in October. I know because I just finished closing a hail damage file for a property out on Route 34, and I still had my camera bag on the back seat. My sister met me at the edge of the driveway, not the porch, the driveway. She had her arms crossed before I even got out of the truck. "He's not having a good day," she said. "Let me see him." "Wendell." She said my name like a period. "I handle everything for Dad now. He doesn't need the stress." I looked past her at the house. The front blinds were drawn. My father's truck was parked in the carport and it was dirty. That might mean nothing to most people. But my father had maintained that truck the way some men maintain their faith, consistently and without being asked. He'd gotten the oil changed every 4 months without fail since 1994. The inspection sticker on the windshield was expired by 2 months. I took a picture of it before I drove away. Not because I knew what I was doing yet, just because taking pictures is what I do when something is wrong. I sat in my truck at the end of the road for a long time. Then I drove to a pilot station 7 miles out and made one phone call to the County Adult Protective Services line. I'd looked up the number twice before and closed the screen each time. That day I let it ring through. Before I explain what came next, I need to tell you something about why it took me so long to make that call. Because if I skip that part, nothing else is going to make sense. My mother died of ovarian cancer in the winter of 2009. I was in the middle of a large commercial claim, a fire at a textile warehouse outside Barnesville. 40 employees' livelihoods tied up in the investigation. I'd been on site for 11 days straight. I got the call on a Tuesday night, and I drove through the dark to get home. But she passed at 4:47 in the morning, and I was still on the highway when it happened. I wasn't there. My sister was there. She was in the room, holding my mother's hand. She has never once said a word to me about it directly. She didn't have to. It's in the way she says my name sometimes. It's in the pause before she answers when someone asks who was with Mom at the end. I know it, and she knows I know it. And for 15 years, whenever she implied I wasn't fully present for our family, wasn't doing enough, wasn't showing up enough, I backed down. Because she wasn't wrong about one thing. I wasn't there when it counted. I let that fact keep me quiet for 7 months while my father's world got smaller and smaller. My son Ben is 26. He works at a regional credit union in Macon as a loan specialist. He's careful with numbers the way I was careful with photographs, methodically, without drama. He called me 2 days after I got turned away from the driveway. "Dad," he said, "I need you to look something up. Granddad's property tax records, county assessor site." I pulled it up on my laptop. The assessed value on my father's property, 4 acres and a ranch house outside Forsyth, a house he'd owned for 31 years, had been flagged for a pending sale review. I pulled up the county deed transfer records. A quitclaim deed had been filed 6 weeks earlier. My father's signature was on it. The property had been placed into a trust. The trustee listed was my sister. Ben was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dad, there's something else. Don't react until I finish." He told me he'd been looking at account activity patterns, tied to routing numbers he recognized from our grandfather's Christmas checks. What he found was that my father's primary savings account at the Forsyth Community Credit Union had seen withdrawals totaling over $60,000 between April and September. Cash withdrawals and cashier's checks made payable to a company called DLR Property Holdings LLC. I wrote the name down. I knew that LLC. My brother-in-law had registered it in 2021 when he was trying to launch a real estate holding operation. It had never gotten off the ground, or so I'd thought. I called Opal next. Opal is 68 years old. She's lived in the yellow house to the right of my father's property for 22 years. She was a social worker with the state of Georgia for 3 decades before she retired, and she notices things the way former social workers always do, quietly, completely, without announcing it until she's asked. I asked her directly what she'd seen. She told me she hadn't seen my father outside since June. He used to sit on the back porch every evening in decent weather with a glass of sweet tea and his AM radio, listening to Braves games. He'd been doing that since 1987. June was when it stopped. She'd walked over, once in July, and my sister had answered the door, said Dad was resting. She tried again in August. That time my brother-in-law had come all the way out to the property line and told her, in a polite enough voice, that the family needed their privacy and they'd be in touch if they needed anything. I wrote down both dates, Opal said. I wasn't surprised. Former social workers keep records. Did you contact anyone? I asked. She paused. I filed an APS report online in August. Someone called me back and said they'd follow up. Another pause. I don't know what happened after that. Nobody contacted me again. I hung up and opened a new folder on my laptop. I had spent 28 years building claim files. I knew how to document a pattern. I started with the first missed call in March and worked forward. 19 calls. 3 answered. 1 voicemail from my sister in April. Dad asked me to let you know he needs some quiet time while he recovers. We'll call you when he's up for visitors. He'd had a small stroke, a TIA. In February. We'd all known about it. What I hadn't known was that my sister would use it as a door she could close behind her. The APS intake worker was professional. She asked the right questions. At the end, she told me what I later learned they always have to say. If my father told the investigator he was fine and that he was there by choice, nothing could be legally compelled. He had capacity. He had the right to make his own decisions. I understand that, I said. I'm not asking you to override him. I'm asking you to give him a chance to speak when his daughter isn't standing in the same room. She scheduled a visit within 10 business days. 9 days later, a man named Roscoe, a deputy I'd crossed paths with on a fraud case years back, someone with a good eye and a better memory, called me out of professional courtesy. He'd been assigned to accompany the investigator. You can't be there, he said. You know that. I know. And I can't go in without an invitation. I can only look at what's in plain sight. I know, Roscoe. There was a pause. Is there something specific you want me to pay attention to? I thought about it. Look at his hands. Look at whether he seems cold. It's November now. See if he's dressed for the house. Why? I don't know yet. That's why I'm asking you to look. He called me back that evening. My father had answered the door. The house was clean, a candle burning in the kitchen. My sister had remained in the room throughout the entire conversation, seated across the room, never close enough to prompt, just visible. My father had answered every question clearly and without hesitation. Was he safe? Yes. Was he free to contact anyone he wanted? Yes. Did he feel he was being prevented from anything? No. He looked thin, Roscoe said, but he wasn't in distress. I closed my eyes. Wendell. Roscoe's voice dropped a half step. When they were leaving, your dad shook my hand. He held on a second longer than normal, and he said, Roscoe, how's your mother doing up in Milledgeville? I sat straight up. Roscoe's mother had died in 2019. My father had gone to that funeral. He'd brought a pound cake from the bakery on Main Street and had stayed for 2 hours. They'd known each other since 1978. He knows your mother is gone, I said. Yes, Roscoe said. He absolutely knows. I sat there for a moment and then I understood. My father is not confused. My father is sending a signal to the one person in that room who would recognize it as a signal. I wrote it down in the claim folder. He's still in there. He's still trying. Ben drove over the next morning. We sat at my kitchen table with his laptop and my folder between us. He'd studied enough about vascular dementia to know the difference between cognitive decline and performance. Granddad's TIA affected his word recall a little, he said. That's documented in his records. But his long-term memory, his social orientation, those are intact. He knew exactly who Roscoe was. He knew his mother's name. He knew where she had lived. He set the laptop down. That's not confusion. That's precision. I thought about the phone call in July. That old push mower still sitting in the back of the Hendersons' lot. The Henders had been our neighbors when I was growing up. They moved away in 1991. There was no push mower. There had never been a push mower, but back of the lot, my father always kept his important papers in the back of his storage building, in a metal file box behind the garden tools. He'd told me where it was when I was 22. He'd told me alone. I hadn't understood what he was telling me, not then. I got up and went to my truck. In the glove box, under the yellow sticky note I'd written in July, I found the spare key my father had given me years back. Brass, worn smooth at the bow. I stood there holding it, and I knew exactly why he'd mentioned that lot, that mower, that back of the property. I put the key back. I wasn't going to use it, not the way I wanted to. A certified letter arrived from a law firm in Atlanta 10 days later. My sister had filed a petition for emergency guardianship of my father, citing cognitive decline following TIA and his alleged inability to manage his own financial affairs. The petition noted that other family members had failed to participate meaningfully in his care over the preceding 7 months. 7 months of calls that went to voicemail, one visit where I'd been met at the driveway, and that enforced silence was now being presented in a legal document as proof that I hadn't cared enough to show up. The hearing was set for 12 weeks out. I knew what full guardianship meant. It meant my sister would hold the authority to decide where my father lived, who he could see, what happened to every dollar and acre he owned. The house, the 4 acres, the retirement accounts, the CD he'd built up over 40 years working at the paper mill. All of it under her control, without his input and without mine. The words she had said to me in the driveway would become court-ordered and permanent. The physician affidavit attached to the petition was from a doctor my father had seen once at an urgent care clinic for 11 minutes. I opened the claim folder. I wrote 12 weeks. She doesn't need to win. She just needs me to stay quiet for 12 more weeks. I asked my sister to meet me. I chose the Waffle House on Route 83 because it was public and well lit, and because I didn't trust what I might say in a private space. She arrived 7 minutes late, ordered coffee, and looked at me across the table with the expression I recognized from our whole lives. Patient, slightly burdened. The look of someone who has already decided this conversation will disappoint her. I went through the dates without raising my voice. I wasn't there to fight. I wanted to see my father. I wanted to be involved in his care. She could be present every minute if she wanted. She reached into her bag and took out her phone. She tapped the screen and held it face up on the table between us. A voicemail. My father's voice, clear as anything. "Wendell, I'm doing fine, son. Don't worry about me." I recognized his voice immediately. I said, "What date is that from?" She didn't answer right away. A beat too long, a few weeks ago. He mentions the Georgia-Florida game. That game was in October. It's December. She picked up the phone. The silence between us lasted about 4 seconds, long enough to mean something. She stood up, left $3 for the coffee. At the door, she stopped and looked back. "You want to know why Dad doesn't ask about you, Wendell? Because you weren't there when Mom was dying. He's always remembered that. We both have." She opened the door. "If you file anything else with the county, I'll petition for a restraining order, and I will get one." She walked out. I sat there with her $3 and my untouched coffee and the folder still open on the table. Opal called me the following Thursday. She had been reading the Forsyth County Courier, print edition, still delivered to her mailbox, still read cover to cover. She said there was something I needed to hear, and she read me the notice. The Monroe County Veterans Coalition was holding its annual recognition dinner at the VFW post on Commerce Drive. Dinner, remarks from the county commissioner, and a ceremony honoring veterans for lifetime community service. The honoree selected by the chapter committee was Horace Dillard, my father, who had served 2 tours in Vietnam and never mentioned it unless someone asked. Then Opal read the last line of the notice slowly, like she knew I needed each word to land separately. Mrs. Rhonda Beckett, in her role as dedicated caregiver, would present the honor on behalf of the family. I asked Opal to read it again. She did. I set the phone on the counter and stood in my kitchen and understood exactly what my sister had arranged. A public ceremony, local officials, a live stream through the county Facebook page. She was going to bring my father out, cleaned up and sitting at the front table, and accept public credit for being his devoted caregiver. She was going to hand him a plaque and a microphone in front of everyone who had known him for 30 years. She was going to hand my father the one thing she'd spent 8 months systematically removing from him, the right to speak in public, and use it to finish the story she'd been writing about herself. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know some of you are listening to this with your jaw tight. Maybe you have a sibling. Maybe there's someone in your life right now who is speaking for a person you love, and you've been sitting on your hands because you don't know what step to take and you don't want to make things worse. If that's you, I want you to type one thing in the comments. Not a whole story, just this. How long have you been quiet? Because I was quiet for 7 months, and I'm going to tell you what that silence cost. If you want to hear what happened at that dinner, what my father said when he finally had a microphone, hit like and follow so you don't miss it. I'll be right here. Here's what I did in the 4 weeks before the dinner. 3 things, all of them were public record. First, I filed a motion in the guardianship case to be recognized as an interested party. As my father's adult child, I had legal standing. The court granted it in 5 days. As part of that filing, I requested the appointment of a guardian ad litem, an independent attorney assigned by the court to assess my father's actual wishes and interests, separate from anything my sister or I claimed. Second, I bought a ticket to the recognition dinner, $40. I registered under my full name. Third, I wrote my father a letter, certified mail, return receipt requested, not because my sister couldn't intercept it, she probably could, but a certified letter creates a postmark. It creates a record of when I tried. The letter was 4 sentences long. Dad, I still have the key you gave me. I haven't used it. I'm not going to. I'll wait for you to open the door. I drove it to the post office myself. The court appointed a guardian ad litem named Maureen Holt, 19 years in family law, minimal online presence, no flashy website, the kind of attorney who has been around long enough not to need one. She interviewed my father at the house. My sister was present throughout, her right as the named POA holder. The interview lasted 35 minutes. Her report came through the court file. I read both pages twice. The first page, my father presented as oriented, coherent, and able to articulate his preferences clearly. He expressed satisfaction with his living situation and did not indicate any desire to change his care arrangements. The second page had a single paragraph under additional observations. I will quote it. The subject wore long sleeves and a buttoned cardigan throughout the interview. Ambient temperature in the home was noted at 74 Fahrenheit. When offered the option to remove the outer layer, the subject declined without explanation. That one paragraph, that was what Maureen Holt had seen and could not act on alone. I called her office. She answered herself. I introduced myself and said, Mrs. Holt, I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm asking one question. Would you be willing to attend a public community event as a private citizen this Saturday and simply observe? I told her about the dinner, about the ceremony, about the fact that my father would be standing at a podium with a microphone in front of 90 people who had known him for decades. She was quiet for a long time. Mr. Dillard, she said, what exactly are you planning to do? I told her I was going to ask my father one question. She asked me what question. I told her I wasn't going to say it here, not on the phone, not in advance. It only had power in that specific room, at that specific moment, with my father holding that microphone. If I said it anywhere else, it sounded like nothing. She would understand when she heard it in context, the same way my father would. She was quiet. I heard her pen tap against something twice. You're not going to make accusations? No. You're not going to present documents or deliver a speech? No. You're going to raise your hand and ask one question, that's all. That's all. A long pause. Then, I'll sit in the back row. The night before the dinner, I drove past my father's house. I wasn't planning to stop. Late job, county road, his street barely 3 minutes out of the way. I told myself I was just driving. It was past 10. The neighborhood was dark and quiet. I slowed as I passed. My sister was standing on the back porch with her phone to her ear. The garage light was on. She didn't see me. I was moving slow, headlights down out of old residential habit. I pulled to the end of the block and sat with the engine off. I could hear her voice through my cracked window. Not every word, just the register of it. Low and scared and tight. The voice a person uses when they have run out of options and they know it. She said something about 2 more weeks. She said something about what she'd promised her husband. Then a long silence while she listened. Then, I know. She wasn't crying, but she was close. I sat there for a while. Here is what I want to say honestly. Because I told you at the start I wasn't going to hide anything. What I heard on that porch wasn't the voice of someone who hated my father. It was the voice of someone who had grabbed the nearest rope when she was going under. The nearest rope happened to be his savings accounts and his autonomy and his right to answer his own phone. That doesn't change the harm, but it changes what I understand about how it happened. My sister was drowning. She chose the wrong way to stay afloat. I drove home. That was the last time I saw her before everything broke open. The VFW post on Commerce Drive seats about 90 people in folding metal chairs. Low ceiling, fluorescent lighting, the particular smell of old wood paneling and industrial coffee. Photographs on the walls going back to 1951. A sheet cake near the door, with white frosting, and a small American flag pressed into the corner. We arrived at 6:45. Ben wore a button-down shirt. He looked steadier than I felt. We took row 3, aisle side. I could see the full stage from there. A low platform, a freestanding microphone at the center, the county commissioner at the head table with my sister beside him, and my father in the first chair closest to the aisle. He was wearing his good dark green flannel shirt, the one he'd had since 2003. His hair was combed. He was sitting straight. His hands were folded on the table in front of him. Then he turned around, not looking for anyone specifically, just scanning the room the way people do at public events. But his eyes found Ben first and then found me, and they stayed. My father, who had not spoken to me in 7 months, smiled. The program started at 7. The commissioner gave a short welcome. The chapter president read the citation. Then my sister went to the microphone, and I'll give her this. She was good at it. She had the room from the first sentence. She talked about the sleepless nights, the appointments, the sacrifices. She said family was the only thing that mattered, and people believed her because she said it like she meant some of it. Then, near the end, without using my name, some children find reasons not to show up. I won't name names. I'll just say that when it counted, I was the one who was there. A few people glanced toward row 3. She moved on. Ben's hand found my arm. I put my hand over his and didn't move. She extended her hand toward the front table. And now I'd like to bring up the most important person in this room. The man who taught me that showing up is everything, Dad. The room applauded before he even stood. My sister moved to help him up. He accepted the assist. He climbed 3 steps to the platform slowly, holding the railing. The chapter president handed him a shadow box with his service medals inside. He took it in both hands and looked down at it. The applause faded. He stood at the microphone and said nothing. The room waited. 5 seconds, 8. My sister began to move toward the stage stairs, hand already reaching forward, already planning the gracious things she'd say about how tired he was, how grateful they all were. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my hand, the way you do in a meeting when you're waiting to be recognized. The chapter president looked at me, uncertain. I have one question, I said, for the honoree. The room went still in that specific way. Rooms go still when something unplanned is happening, and no one is certain yet whether it's going to be awkward or serious. I stepped into the aisle. I stood about 10 feet from the platform. I looked at my father, not at my sister, not at the commissioner, not at the room, at my father only. Dad, I said. My voice was level. Do you remember what you used to say to me every time I left on a long job? Every single time, no matter how long I'd be gone? 4 seconds of silence. My father looked at my sister. She was very still. Her expression was controlled, not threatening, nothing you could point to specifically, just present, just visible. Then my father looked back at me. He set the shadow box down on the podium. He reached up with his left hand and pulled back his sleeve. The skin on his wrist carried a reddened band, 3 fingers wide, running in a full circle around the joint. The kind of marking that comes from consistent pressure over weeks, not from any single incident. The skin was roughened at the edges, calloused the way skin gets when something presses against it, long enough to leave a permanent record. The room saw it. I heard a chair shift somewhere behind me. I heard someone inhale sharply. A woman in the 3rd row put her hand over her mouth. My father pulled his sleeve down. He picked up the microphone the way I remembered him, picking up the telephone when I was a kid, with the practiced, unhurried calm of a man who had never needed volume to be heard. My name is Horace Dillard, he said. I turned 80 in May. A lot of you worked alongside me at the mill for 20 years, and I saw most of you at my wife's funeral. I appreciate you being here tonight. No one laughed. They were waiting. My son asked if I remember what I used to say when he left on a long job. A pause. I used to say, don't let anybody take what's yours. He looked at my sister. I have been wanting to say that again for approximately 7 months. The room was completely silent. In March, I signed documents. I was still on blood thinners from the TI, and I wasn't reading carefully enough. That is on me, and I want to be clear about that. He took a breath. Since March, I have not been permitted to answer my own phone. I have not been allowed to go outside without being escorted. There have been days when I was not permitted to leave my bedroom, until my daughter decided I could. He said it the way he would have read a measurement off a board, factual, unhurried, without self-pity. He looked at my sister. Rhonda, how much is left in the CD account you have been drawing on since April? For about 5 seconds, no one in that room moved. Then the back row shifted. Maureen Holt rose to her feet. She said clearly, and without hurry, I am the guardian ad litem appointed by the Monroe County Probate Court in the Dillard guardianship matter. I am an officer of that court, and I am formally noting what I have observed this evening. 90 people turned toward the back of the room. The crowd made that low, collective sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur, of a group of people recalibrating what they thought they were watching. My sister moved toward the stage. He's confused, he doesn't. Rhonda, my father's voice through the microphone, not loud but absolute. Last Tuesday you asked me to sign a document releasing the land trust. I told you I needed to think about it. You told me the buyers would walk by Friday. He looked at her steadily. Do you want me to continue? My sister sat down. The county commissioner was on his phone, thumb moving. The man in row 1 who'd been filming for the county Facebook page still had his camera up, red indicator light still blinking. The view counter was in the hundreds and climbing. Roscoe came through the side door. He'd been in the parking lot the entire time. He looked at my sister. My sister looked at the tablecloth and did not look up again. I walked up the 3 steps to the platform. I took off my jacket and laid it over my father's shoulders. He put his hand on my arm. I looked at Roscoe. He gave me the smallest nod. I said, he'll come with you. He doesn't need anything else right now. It took 5 months to settle, which is fast. Here are the numbers, because you deserve them. The power of attorney was revoked 11 days after the dinner. My father signed the revocation at Maureen Holt's office, with Maureen present as a neutral witness. My sister was not in the building. The guardianship petition was dismissed. The judge's written order included one sentence I have read more than once. The petitioner's conduct over the preceding 8 months demonstrates a pattern inconsistent with the fiduciary obligations of a caregiver and consistent with the systematic advancement of personal financial interests. The forensic accounting came back at $91,200 withdrawn from my father's retirement accounts and CD savings between April and November. A civil judgment was entered against my sister and brother-in-law for full repayment over 12 years with interest. The criminal charge was financial exploitation of an elder, a felony under Georgia law. My sister entered an Alford plea. The sentence was 14 months suspended, probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a permanent prohibition on holding power of attorney or fiduciary authority over any person. DLR Property Holdings LLC was dissolved. My brother-in-law's construction operation had collapsed in 2022. They owed $78,000 to 3 creditors. I found this out afterward, from the prosecution's financial summary. I'm not offering it as an excuse. I'm offering it because it's the thing I heard in that low voice on the back porch. A person who had grabbed the nearest thing available when they were going under, without thinking clearly about what was tied to the other end. My sister asked whether she could write letters to my father. My father said she could write letters. He would read them when he felt like it. Some he has answered, some he has not. He told me once that he is still deciding what forgiveness looks like at his age, and that he is in no particular hurry to figure it out. The first time I sat with him at his kitchen table, just the 2 of us, no case pending, no one else expected, was a Sunday in January. He'd put on some weight. The color was back in his face. He had a crossword half finished on the table, and he pushed it aside to make room for our coffee mugs. I had been carrying a question for 15 years. I asked it. Dad, when Mom died, were you angry that I didn't make it in time? He put both hands around his mug. He thought about it the way he always did before he said something he meant, slowly, without rushing it. Wendell, he said, when your mother had that final bad night, do you know what she asked me? She asked whether I thought the Barnesville claim was going to get resolved without you there. He looked at me. I told her probably not. She said good. He needs to stay. He set the mug down. She didn't say she wanted you home. She said she wanted you to stay where you were. I didn't say anything for a while. Rhonda used it, I said finally. Every single time there was any tension between us. He nodded slowly. I know. And I let it sit because I thought you knew the truth of it, and I didn't want to turn it into a family argument. I let you carry something that was never really yours to carry. He paused. That wasn't right, and I'm sorry for it. I hadn't been expecting that. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just sat there for a while. Before I left that Sunday, my father went to the back of the house. I heard him in the storage building behind the carport. When he came back, he had a key on a plain ring. New cut brass, still sharp at the edges. Had the locks changed in December, he said. This one's yours. I looked at it. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and I put the old key on the table between us, the one he'd given me years back, worn smooth at the bow. I had it the whole time, I said. 7 months. Never used it. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, ran his thumb along the worn edge. I know, he said quietly. I got your letter. I hadn't brought up the letter. I wasn't sure he'd received it. He went to the kitchen junk drawer, the one with old batteries and rubber bands and takeout menus that had been there since 1993, and he came back with the envelope. Opened carefully, refolded, the crease worn soft at the fold line, the way paper gets when it has been opened and closed many times. He set it in front of me without saying anything. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. But I looked at it anyway. Dad, I still have the key you gave me. I haven't used it. I'm not going to. I'll wait for you to open the door. He slid the new key across the table toward me. I shook my head. You keep that one. I'll ring the bell. You decide whether to answer. He looked at me for a long time. Then he put the new key back in the junk drawer and left the old one on the table between us, and we finished our coffee. There is one thing I hadn't told anyone. Not Ben, not Opal, not Maureen Holt. After the dinner, after Roscoe left with my sister, after Maureen was on her phone in the parking lot, I had a few minutes alone with my father in the VFW hall while things were being sorted. Someone brought him a glass of water. We sat in 2 folding chairs near the stage, just the 2 of us, and I asked him quietly whether he'd received the letter. He took a sip of water. He set the glass on the floor beside his chair. Rhonda brought it in with the rest of the mail, he said. She read the front of the envelope, decided it was harmless, gave it to me with the electric bill. Did you read it? Every night, he said, from the day I got it until the dinner, 41 nights. He said it plainly, like a fact he had simply kept track of. When you wrote that you'd wait for me to open the door, that was the first time in months that somebody gave me a choice about something. Everybody else was telling me what was happening, what I needed, what I wanted. He looked at me. You said you'd wait, that I would decide. He folded his hands in his lap. I started working out a plan that night, he said. The dinner was 4 weeks away. I needed 4 weeks. I've thought about that a great deal since. He wasn't waiting to be rescued. He was already moving toward the door. I just happened to arrive in time to hold it open. It's April now. The weather has turned and my father is out on the back porch most evenings again. AM radio, sweet tea, same as he has been doing since 1987. He goes out in the mornings to check the garden bed along the south fence, the one he told the home care assistant he was going to put in once the ground softened enough. I come on Sundays, I ring the bell, he opens the door. 2 Sundays ago, he met me in his robe with his crossword and said, 8 across, 11 letters. Definition, to take possession of something that belongs to another. I sat down at the kitchen table. He slid the puzzle toward me. I looked at it for a moment. I think I'd leave that one blank, I said. He took the pencil out of my hand, and he filled in the letters himself. Then we had our coffee.